Welcome to today's presentation on inquiry and problem-based learning in digital spaces. The focus of the presentation is a synopsis of results of a study conducted by FACiLiTATE, the National Inquiry and Problem-Based Learning Network. Our aim is to support staff in the use of inquiry and problem-based learning. This project received funding from the Network and Discipline Fund, from the National Forum for the Enhancement of Teaching and Learning in Higher Education. The study was conducted jointly by representatives from Dundalk IT, University College Cork, the University of Limerick, and Immaculate College, who are the lead institution in this project. My name is Norma. I am a research assistant working on this project and will present today on behalf of the group. For updates, follow us on Twitter at PBL FACiLiTATE, #PBL 2022, and you can also find updates on our website. FACiLiTATE have representatives from Immaculate College, University College Cork, University College Dublin, University of Limerick, Dundalk IT and Maynooth University. This presentation will take approximately 20 minutes. What is problem-based learning? Problem-based learning describes a constructivist pedagogical approach in which the impetus is on deep student-centred learning. It was established in 1969 in McMaster University, Canada, in response to medical students' lack of application of knowledge and disengagement with traditional methods of learning. It is an innovative pedagogy which has proliferated widely worldwide, particularly in the fields of health and in education. Problem-based learning follows the core-centred principles, as described by Barrow's 1996, based on structuring learning around cues presented through scenarios. The PBL approach involves small groups of students working collaboratively to set learning goals and undertake self-directed learning to solve a contextually based problem. Problem-based learning uses a facilitator to guide students to pose questions and ultimately to help them in their acquisition of course content. In contrast to traditional methods of learning in which students listen to their lectures and take notes, problem-based learning promotes active participation and engagement with the learning process. While PBL was developed for and is traditionally used in face-to-face settings, the COVID-19 pandemic has necessitated a move online. FACiLiTATE recognised the additional complexity for both staff and students in supporting learning and collaboration in an online environment. The online environment dictates that students need to be increasingly independent, collaborative, while simultaneously developing digital skills. In this respect, we wanted to explore staff and student perceptions of the pivot to PBL online across multiple higher education institutions and also across various disciplines. This enabled us to cultivate cross-discipline knowledge and learning, which has the potential to inform innovative teaching and learning methods, in addition to further developing transdisciplinary practice for both community engagement and practice professionals. So our overall aim was to explore staff and student perceptions of transitioning to problem-based learning online in digital spaces. And within that, we had a number of sub-objectives. And this included exploring the adaptation of this pedagogical approach to the online environment, the impact of the digital tools, perceptions of the student experience, and attributes of being a successful student, both from a staff and student perspective, and preferences of the approach to PBL online going forward. This was a two-phased mixed method study. So initially we disseminated surveys in November 2021, and this was followed up by focus group interviews in February and March 2022, which informed our overall perceptions. We've representative disciplines from engineering, business, education, humanities, nursing and midwifery, paramedic studies, science, and clinical therapies. So here is our response data from Immaculate College, Dundalk IT, UCC, and the University of Limerick. So as you can see, staff, we had 16 respondents to the survey and 6 interviewees. And for our students, we had 67 respondents to our survey and 2 interviewees. So first of all, let's start with some quantitative data from our staff. Let's look at the years of experiencing of facilitating ePBL. So just over a third have less than 5 years experience, just under a third, so 31.3% between 5 and 10 years experience, and again just under a third of more than 10 years of experience of facilitating E and PBL. When we asked a similar question about experience of facilitating EPBL online, the response was 1 to 2 years, which is coherent with that pivot online during the COVID-19 pandemic. We also asked about opportunities in transitioning to EPBL online, and the most populous answers was scaffolding the EPBL process, organising teamwork, and also the assessment process. In terms of what those challenges would be, contrastingly, the most popular answers were all centred around engagement. That's student engagement with the discipline, student engagement with each other, and student engagement with you, the facilitator. Now, let's look at the modes of delivery preferences going forward beyond COVID-19. So our students, 21 answer this question, 9 have a preference for EPBL face-to-face, 10 a preference for a blended approach, and 2 have a preference for exclusively online. With our staff, 16 answered this question, 8 have a preference for EPBL face-to-face, 6 a blended approach, and 2 exclusively EPBL online. So moving on to our qualitative data, and the following is a synthesis of both our staff and student responses due to their coherence. So theme 1 is navigating digital tools, and we also have a number of sub-themes and sub-themes. That's the use and impact of digital tools, technological competence, including assumptions about students' level of competence, and sharing of digital hacks, both in a formal, such as departmental support, and informal capacity, such as sharing knowledge among staff and students. So first of all, looking at the use and impact of digital tools, staff discuss various digital tools perceived as useful for conducting PBL online. And just to preface this qualitative analysis by saying our staff quotes are in yellow and our student quotes are in blue. So those digital tools included interactive polls, interactive whiteboards, OneNote and comic strips and animations for presenting materials such as Amber and Canva. Breakout rooms were used to facilitate plenary sessions, in which insights from all groups were shared collectively to ensure students had access to relevant information. As a staff member pointed out, we had breakout rooms and we would come back periodically in a plenary session where we could share any insights that were happening in the individual channels to each group. A student also discussed how the chat function enables students who weren't comfortable verbalising contributions to still participate in discussion, labelling it a second layer of engagement. So even if someone wasn't comfortable talking, they could just type in, and so that was like a second layer of engagement. However, there were issues in relation to digital competence, students with learning disabilities and equitable access to technology, which may have compromised the efficacy of the use of the digital tools. So first of all, one staff member referred to a student who had dyslexia, who struggled to undertake the role of scribe during PBL online. There was one girl in my group who was severely dyslexic and really struggled with putting stuff on the notebook. While some staff had the perception that students' technical skills would be superior to staff, this initial presumption was dispelled by actual experience. As a staff interviewee recounted, they're referring to the students, actually not particularly more skilled than me. From a student perspective, they perceive this as a fallacy, stating, I think there's like a presumption that young people know how to use Microsoft and all these things. I know how to Google things, that's about it. According to staff, the implementation of digital tools was preceded by trial and error, and liaison with colleagues on both formal and informal channels. In terms of availability of technical support, while some staff members mentioned high levels of support from the department, for instance, there was ongoing support all the time. If anyone had an issue or query, they, tech support, were really only an email or phone call away. The support was not ubiquitous across departments. As another staff member mentioned, it's frustrating and I think tech support has been an issue. Moving on to Team 2, which is adaptation to EPBL online. Our sub-themes here are initial expectations, actual experience and views evolving over time, which informed future preferences. So first of all, the initial expectations regarding the pivot to PBL online was accompanied by feelings of apprehensiveness. Staff describe it as a crash course, a steep learning curve, and the phenomenon as pretty much do or die. However, with actual experience of implementing PBL online, views became notably more sanguine. As a staff member pointed out, once I learned how to operate the technology, I simply conducted the PBL session as I would in person, thus drawing parallels with the face-to-face equivalent. In terms of future preferences going forward, views were mixed. Some participants, such as this student, believed, "I do think it should be blended learning." However, other staff members felt, while it was doable and an option should be needed in the context of the pandemic, ultimately they have a preference for face-to-face PBL due to the social presence afforded by the in-person setting. As a staff member pointed out, "I don't think there will ever be a pedagogical approach that would suit better than face-to-face for PBL." Our next theme is the role of the ePBL facilitator. It's a delicate balance. So looking at our sub-themes, more input required by facilitators, grading assessments, and boundaries. So first of all, our staff members recounted feeling compelled to have extra input to PBL online, despite an acknowledgement that extra input is not in coherence with the philosophy of this pedagogy. As an interviewee pointed out, "I felt as a facilitator I probably had to be part of that process a little more than I usually did face-to-face. This occurrence did not go unnoticed by our students," who stated, "But they," referring to the facilitators, "were very engaged. Very engaged. I actually felt they were more engaged than face-to-face." This was most pronounced when considering boundaries, in particular in relation to staff availability for contact outside of scheduled tutorial hours. Staff made themselves available to facilitate feedback and questions posed by students. However, despite this availability of contact, staff felt that power dynamic and that distance between staff and students was more exacerbated in the online environment. As an interviewee pointed out, "You're pushing, you're saying I'm available, you're saying here's a private group chat, here's an email, contact me, talk to me if there's any questions." But there still seems to be that distance. In terms of grading assessments online, staff recounted this was quite challenging, and in particular the participation component, primarily linked to difficulties in deciphering levels of engagement due to ambiguity surrounding non-verbal communication. It's difficult to decipher or know how much the students were engaged with it, and a student strengthens this point, saying it's really hard to judge how they're engaging non-verbally. Now, let's move on to theme 4, which is the ePBL tutorial. So this refers to the structure of the tutorial. Our sub-themes are expectations, ground rules, barriers to communication, including the ability to hide behind the screen, and the structure of the assessment process. So our staff recounted how the setting of ground rules was instrumental to the effective running of problem-based learning online. In particular, in the terms of reference, the inclusion of cameras on was facilitative of active participation. As our staff member pointed out, in the terms of references at the start of PBL, we asked groups to set their own rules for the group, and within these we would have encouraged cameras to be turned on and active participation. In terms of the structure of the tutorial, well, some staff members recounted keeping it in line with face-to-face. Other staff members recounted a necessity of extra preparation to enable this pivot online. One staff member recounted, "I just found I had to prepare in a very fine-grained way. That was one thing that has been a benefit because it's left me with a set of post-lesson reflections and also a set of lesson plans." In terms of the assessment procedures, we also moved to a level of continuous assessment for some. Some assessment procedures remained stationary. In terms of continuous assessment, one staff member recounted how they changed the assessment approach from one that had an end of semester exam worth 50% and 50% continuous assessment to a series of assignments worth 10 to 15%, which were said to be more coherent with students working more proactively throughout the semester. All staff members recounted that the online environment was not conducive to effective communication. As a staff member pointed out, it's easier for students to hide behind their peers in an online class, even with small groups. And this was primarily attributed to difficulties interpreting non-verbal communication and the ability to hide behind the screen, and also that missed timings and disjointment of conversations that didn't enable for deep-level discussions, which are a necessity in this pedagogy. As our student pointed out, non-verbal communication was like non-existent. And our final theme is the student experience, which was informed by perspective from both our staff and our students. So we looked at, well, who is the successful student, the impact on the social aspect of problem-based learning online, and feedback. So when we asked staff members what makes a student successful online, overall the feedback came back is it's very coherent with a successful student face-to-face, in that they're proactive, they're engaged, and they work very hard. As a staff member pointed out, if you're going to wait for other people to make things happen, that's not helpful. It's not helpful in face-to-face, and it's certainly not helpful when there are challenges like we had online. And another survey respondent say that they are prepared, they're adaptable, they attend class and they work hard. However, there was an acknowledgement that students need to have the digital skills, be digitally competent, and external variables may well impact on, beyond the student's control, may well impact on performance. In terms of the impact on the social aspects of EPBL Online, remembering this was in the context of a pandemic, students felt it afforded them a social opportunity, which wasn't afforded by other traditional methods of learning. As a student pointed out, and like it was quarantine, I'm pretty sure all of us just wanted to talk to people. It was a way of making your voice heard. And a survey respondent from our staff pointed out, I believe learning is enhanced considerably through social encounters. In terms of feedback from our staff, some explicitly thought it from surveys, some, on the other hand, had informal chats, and some it was through their own intuition. But on the whole, it was either positive or mixed. We had no exclusive negative feedback. However, that social aspect is so important, and it's the reason why our staff felt they weren't able to compensate for the method of delivery. We weren't able to compensate. I don't think for all our efforts we could compensate for that crucial loss of connection. We also asked our students for advice on informing other students on how to be successful during problem-based learning online. And here is some key advice from them. And it really centres around taking individual responsibility for your learning, working hard and engaging with your peers, your classmates and also your lecturer. So here's some quotes. Read lots of readings, communicate with your group, ask lecturers for advice or help if you need it, look at a topic as a whole and research it in that way. Keep up with your weekly readings and communicate with the group as much as possible on what you're reading. And always remember that when you were involved in this type of learning, you were in charge of the learning. In order to learn the material, you must engage 100% of the time. And this is a quote from a student who experienced problem-based learning for the first time in an online environment. And this student is a final year general nursing student. And in a normal classroom, like you're just sitting there looking at a screen, like the lecturer is talking at you, like you don't really need to engage, you just need to memorize more than anything. But with PBL, you get a case scenario and you have to kind of start thinking from clinical judgment. You'd really have to think rather than just sitting back, like listening to someone talk at you. So I did find that quite beneficial. So thank you very much for listening to today's presentation. Just to end our presentation, I think this quote really sums up how difficult the pivot was and challenging, but how much students appreciated the work that was gone in at the time. So it's a funny thing, you may not be doing everything perfectly, but they appreciate you're making the effort. Thank you very much for listening to this presentation and I hope you enjoyed it.